You think giving money is always mercy. But what if something else is watching when your hand opens? What if the street is not empty, but charged with unseen transactions? I stood inside the occult. I know how exchanges really work. Tonight, a hidden mechanism is exposed. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You were told giving is always pure. You were told generosity is neutral. That is not how the spiritual realm works. Nothing moves without law. Nothing transfers without consequence, especially money. When your hand releases money, something else opens. Not emotionally, spiritually. In the occult, we never saw money as paper. We saw it as agreement, as permission, as energy carrying identity. Every coin carries a story. Every note carries sweat, fear, sacrifice, and intention. Money is never empty. You were taught to look only at the beggar. We were taught to watch what stands behind them. Because the street is not neutral ground. It is one of the most trafficked spiritual territories on earth. Altars are not only built in temples. They are built in locations, intersections, doorways, corners where desperation repeats itself daily. And you think repetition is accidental. It is not. In occult systems, repetition consecrates ground. Where suffering loops, authority forms. Where pity is harvested, entities feed. I'm not saying every beggar is evil. Listen carefully. I am saying every transaction is observed. Some people on the street are victims. Others are spiritual access points without knowing it. And a few are intentionally placed. In occult practice, we used poverty as bait, not because we hated the poor. Because poverty lowers discernment. When you see hunger, your guard drops. When you see pain, your authority leaks. Emotion overrides wisdom. That moment matters. Because the spiritual realm responds not to your words, but to your posture. If you give from fear, fear is exchanged. If you give from guilt, guilt transfers. If you give from pressure, pressure follows you home. This is not mysticism. This is law. We were trained to watch donors who hesitated, who looked away, who rushed the act. Those people were spiritually open. You think I am exaggerating, but explain this. Why do some people give generously, yet remain trapped financially? Why do some people feel drained after giving instead of fulfilled? Why do some experience sudden loss, conflict, or heaviness after what they believed was a good deed? Because charity without discernment becomes leakage. In the occult, we call it unsealed release. Money leaves, authority follows, especially when the giving is impulsive. You were never taught to ask one critical question, not should I give, but from where am I giving? Heaven responds to obedience, not impulse. Dark systems respond to impulse, because impulse bypasses spiritual governance. That is why street giving is targeted. No accountability, no covering, no prayer, no discernment, just emotion. And emotion is loud in the spirit. There are spirits assigned to monitor high traffic generosity zones, not to stop kindness, but to redirect outcomes. You give thinking you are sowing upward, but the seed falls sideways. Because not every hand reaching is empty. Some are already holding contracts you cannot see. I have watched rituals fueled entirely by small donations, coins, notes, change. Not because of the amount, but because of the volume of agreements. Thousands of people giving unconsciously. That creates a reservoir. And reservoirs feed systems. You were told the devil only works in darkness. That is a lie. He works in ignorance. You were never taught that giving is warfare, that every act of generosity must be governed. Even scripture warns about casting pearls without discernment. Not because pearls are bad, but because some ground tramples what it cannot steward. When you give without authority, you empower the environment, not the kingdom. That is why some streets never change. Millions flow through them. Yet poverty remains entrenched, because the giving feeds the altar, not the solution. In occult language, this is called sustained dependency. You don't break chains, you reinforce them. You feel compassion. The system feels strength, and you walk away lighter in wallet, but heavier in spirit. I am not telling you to harden your heart. I am telling you to sharpen your authority. True generosity does not weaken the giver, it fortifies them. If your giving leaves you empty, something intercepted it. That is the first truth they never taught you. And this is only the beginning. You were trained to react fast, see need, give immediately, move on. That training did not come from heaven. In the spirit realm, speed without discernment is vulnerability, and vulnerability is never ignored. In occult systems, we studied human compassion intensely, not to destroy it, but to redirect it, because compassion is power. Pure compassion carries authority, but unmanaged compassion leaks it. When you encounter a beggar, the first thing activated is not generosity. It is emotion. Emotion rises before wisdom speaks, and whatever speaks first usually wins. That moment is critical, because the spiritual realm is listening for consent, not verbal consent, emotional consent. When your heart surges but your spirit stays silent, you have stepped out of governance. This is where hijacking begins. Compassion hijacked feels urgent, pressured, heavy. True compassion feels clear, peaceful, directed. The enemy does not stop you from giving. He rushes you into giving without alignment. In the occult, we call this forced mercy, not mercy chosen. Mercy provoked. You see a child, a limp, a trembling hand. Your mind shuts down. Your hand opens. Your authority never engages. That is not kindness. That is override. And override always has a cost. Some of you know this feeling. You give, then immediately feel unsettled, not joyful, not fulfilled, just off. That is not imagination. That is your spirit realizing it acted without command. Heaven does nothing without order. Dark systems do nothing without access. Emotion grants access faster than rebellion ever could. That is why manipulation always targets your feelings first. Let me expose something uncomfortable. Not everyone who looks broken is spiritually empty. Some are spiritually crowded. Trauma attracts attachment. Long-term despair attracts monitors. Repeated begging creates familiarity in the unseen. Familiarity creates permission. Again, listen carefully. This does not mean the person is evil. It means their space is compromised. When you enter that space without authority, you step into their atmosphere. Atmospheres transfer. That is why some of you carry heaviness home. That is why your mood shifts after certain encounters. That is why your thoughts darken unexpectedly. You did not just give money, you touched an environment. In spiritual warfare, environments matter more than intentions. You intended good, but intention without alignment is noise. The occult counts on one thing, you not knowing this, because informed generosity disrupts systems. Uninformed generosity fuels them. That is why certain networks keep people on the street for decades. Food comes, money comes, but freedom never does. Why? Because freedom breaks revenue. Misery monetized is a system, and systems resist disruption. Your compassion becomes currency. Your guilt becomes fuel. You feel bad if you don't give. So you give to relieve yourself. That relief is short-lived because it was never about the other person. It was about silencing discomfort. That is the exchange. Discomfort leaves you. Authority leaves with it. In the occult, this is a clean trade. You think you helped. The system thinks it was fed. Real help confronts. It restores order. It breaks cycles. Impulse giving maintains cycles. That is why heaven often directs generosity, while darkness pressures it. Have you noticed this? When God tells you to give, there is clarity. Even if it costs, there is peace. When pressure tells you to give, there is anxiety, fear of being judged, fear of seeming heartless. Fear is never heaven's motivator. So ask yourself, what voice moved your hand? Because the source determines the outcome. There are moments when God will absolutely tell you to give to a stranger. And when He does, the impact is surgical, targeted, transformative. But when you give because you cannot bear the sight, you are responding to pain, not instruction. Pain is loud. Instruction is precise. Dark systems thrive in noise. They do not need you to worship them. They need you to act without awareness. That is why discernment is resisted so hard. Why people get angry when this is exposed. Because exposure threatens supply. I am not telling you to ignore suffering. I am telling you to stop being ruled by it. You were given authority to govern generosity, not be driven by emotion. When compassion is hijacked, it no longer heals. It sustains captivity. And that is the second truth. There is more you must understand. You think the moment ends when you walk away. It doesn't. In the spirit realm, transactions echo. They ripple. They settle. Every ungoverned exchange leaves residue. That residue looks like confusion, sudden irritation, unexplained fatigue, strange resistance in prayer, financial blockage without logic. People never connected back to giving because no one taught them to. In occult practice, we tracked aftermath, not action. Anyone can observe the act. Only trained eyes watch what follows. The greatest deception is making you think generosity is consequence-free. Nothing spiritual is. After an exchange, spirits assess, not to attack randomly, but to test boundaries. If authority was present, nothing sticks. If authority was absent, doors remain ajar. That is when follow-up begins. Some of you know this pattern. You give. Then within days, money drains unexpectedly. Arguments rise. Focus fractures. Peace thins. You blame coincidence. The system counts on that. Unsealed giving creates an open loop. Open loops attract interference. This is why Scripture emphasizes wisdom alongside generosity, not because God is cautious, because governance matters. Dark systems exploit what heaven respects. If something is not sealed, it is accessible. When you give without prayer, without discernment, without command, you create a spiritual loose end. Loose ends invite interaction. This does not mean you are cursed. It means you were unguarded. There is a difference. The enemy prefers repeat access over dramatic attacks. Quiet erosion beats loud opposition. That is why the effects feel subtle at first. A little discouragement, a little distraction, a little financial leak. Death by 1,000 cuts. In occult terminology, this is called post-contact influence. Not possession, not oppression, just presence. Presence is enough to drain momentum. That is why some people feel spiritually sluggish without obvious sin. They are not rebellious. They are exposed. Exposure is exhausting. Let me say this clearly. Good intentions do not cancel spiritual law. Ignorance does not suspend consequence. That sounds harsh. But it is freeing. Because once you know, you can govern. There are people who give constantly yet feel spiritually thin. Always sowing. Always tired. Always battling lack. That is not generosity bearing fruit. That is generosity being siphoned. Heavenly giving multiplies. Hijacked giving depletes. The difference is alignment. When God sends you, He backs you. When emotion sends you, you are on your own. And being on your own is dangerous in contested spaces. Streets are contested spaces. They carry accumulated despair, desperation, anger, hopelessness. Those emotions attract attachments over time. Again, not blaming people, exposing environments. When you step into an environment without authority, you absorb more than you realize. That is why some of you feel spiritually dirty. After certain encounters, you didn't sin. You absorbed atmosphere. Atmosphere shapes outcomes. This is why seasoned believers pray after encounters, not out of fear, out of wisdom. Covering is not paranoia. It is protocol. The occult has protocols. Heaven has protocols. Only the uninformed walk unprotected. And here is the part that shocks most people. Even when the person you gave to is genuine, the environment can still intercept. Because environments outlay individuals. You bless a person, but the altar in the location absorbs the release. That is why some blessings feel delayed or muted. They were redirected. This is not to make you fearful. Fear closes discernment. This is to make you precise. Precision is power. You were never meant to be reckless with generosity. You were meant to be strategic. That is why Scripture says the wise give thought to their steps. Even in good works, thought is not doubt. Thought is governance. Without governance, generosity becomes vulnerability. Now hear this carefully. None of this means you stop giving. It means you stop bleeding. You stop allowing unsealed exchanges. You stop emotional overrides. You start commanding your generosity. When you give under authority, nothing follows you home. When you give under pressure, pressure follows you home. This is the aftermath most never connect. And until you do, cycles repeat. But there is a higher way. And that leads to the final revelation. You were never meant to be powerless in generosity. You were meant to be authoritative. The highest form of giving is not emotional. It is governed. This is where most teachings stop short. They tell you to give. They never tell you how. In the occult, every exchange was sealed. Every release was directed. Nothing was left open. Heaven is no different. Before you give, your spirit must speak first, not your feelings, not your fear, not your guilt. Authority always speaks before action. The moment you feel pressure, pause. Pressure is a signal, not a command. Heaven does not rush you. Dark systems do. If you cannot pause, you are not being led. When God directs giving, there is permission and peace. When manipulation directs giving, there is urgency and weight. That distinction protects you. You do not need a long prayer on the street. You need alignment. A silent command is enough. You govern the act before the money leaves your hand. You declare ownership of the exchange, not out loud, in authority. This is critical, because money leaves your possession, but authority must not. You release provision. You retain governance. When you give, you seal it. You do not give in to despair. You give over it. You do not submit to the environment. You override it. That is how cycles break. Sometimes the highest obedience is not giving money. It is giving direction, giving prayer, giving food through structure, giving through channels that restore dignity. Random relief sustains systems. Targeted help dismantles them. That is why wisdom builds, while impulse patches. You are not called to fix every problem you see. You are called to obey precisely. Obedience carries protection. You must also understand this. Not giving when pressured is not hardness. It is discipline. Discipline preserves longevity. You cannot pour endlessly without structure. That is not sacrifice. That is depletion. God does not need you empty to prove you are kind. He needs you strong to remain effective. Some of you have been bleeding generosity for years, wondering why nothing shifts. This is why. You were sincere. But sincerity without alignment is unstable. Once you govern your giving, something changes immediately. Peace stays, clarity stays, strength stays, no residue, no aftermath, because the exchange was sealed. And here is the final truth. When you give under authority, even dark systems cannot intercept it. They cannot touch what is sealed. They cannot redirect what was commanded. They cannot feed on what was governed. This is why certain people give boldly and prosper, while others give constantly and struggle. Same act, different authority. You were never taught this because powerless givers are predictable. Governed givers are dangerous. Dangerous to systems built on cycles. Dangerous to exploitation. Dangerous to ignorance. That is why this message matters. Not to make you suspicious, but to make you sovereign. You do not need to fear the street. You need to rule your actions on it. And when you do, giving becomes warfare. Generosity becomes a weapon. Kindness becomes authority. That is the truth that ends the cycle. You are not weak when you give. You are powerful when you give with authority. No exchange controls you. No environment governs you. You decide how and when power moves. Stand alert. Give boldly.